Hey, and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to be setting up the spawn points in the open world. I figured we would do this now before we get into the dealership, because part of the dealership is that once the player has purchased the car, they're supposed to be transported to the open world. So with that, let's get started. So first thing I'm going to do is head over to the BP tutorial, or rather the parent vehicle, and then we're going to set up a custom event. So right click and then custom event, and then this one we're going to call it set target gear to 1, and then we're going to right click again and then get as chaos wheel vehicle movement component, and then we're going to drag off and then look for set target gear, and then we're going to set the target gear to 1, and then we're going to connect it to the custom event, and then that's going to be it. And then we're also going to use the configuration custom event, and then we're going to compile and save. And then also in the game instance, we need to make sure that we have the workshop boolean. And then with that, we can now head over to the open world level. It's going to go content, maps, open world. I'm going to open up map, and then we're going to head over to selection mode, select the landscape, and then for now we're not really going to make big landscapes. I'm going to leave it as the default, and then create. Then we head back into selection mode, and then we're going to head over to window and then environment light mixer, and then just select everything, and then we're going to close that. And then in here what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the cube with the green plus, and then we're going to look for sphere. I'm going to select the sphere, and then we're going to change its property to the center. So what we're going to do with this sphere is we are going to use it as the spawn location. So we're going to move that out the way, and then we're going to alt and then duplicate it, because we're going to use two. One of them is going to be used when we spawn in from the workshop, and then the other one is going to be used when we spawn in from the dealership. And then with that, we're going to select one of them, and then we're going to head over to the open level blueprint, and then just dock this to the top. And then in here, from the event begin play, drag off, and then we're going to look for does save game exist, and then the save game we're looking for is pawn. And then from the turn value, drag off and then look for a branch, and then from the true we're going to load game from slot, and then the slot is the pawn. And then from the load game from slot, we're going to drag off and look for is valid, and then from the is not valid, we're going to drag off and then look for delay until next tick. And then from the completed, we're going to drag this into the execution. So if it's not valid, we're just going to continuously make it loop until it is valid. And if it is valid, we are going to look for the game instance. So below the is valid, right click, and then look for get game instance, and then drag off from return value and then cost to BPGI game, connect that to the is valid, and then from the as BPGI game, drag off and then promote to variable, and then from the load game from slot, return value, drag off, and then we are going to cost to BP save game, connect that to the set, and then from the cost to BP save game, we're gonna drag off and then look for get pawn, get vehicle pawn, and then we're also going to right click and then create a reference to sphere, and then we're also going to drag in the as BPGI game, drag that in, and then drag off and then look for get workshop, and then we're going to use a branch, and then connect that to the cost. And then from the sphere, we're going to drag off and then look for get actor transform, and then from the vehicle pawn, we're going to drag off and then we're going to look for spawn actor from class, connect this to the true, and then we're going to go back into the open world level and then select the other sphere, and then head back into the level blueprint, and then in here as well, right click and then create a reference to sphere 2. And then for this one as well, we're going to drag off and then get actor transform, and then from the branch false, we are going to select the spawn actor, control B, duplicate it, and then from the vehicle pawn, drag that into the class, and then connect that to the false. And then this first sphere, the get actor transform, drag that into the top spawn actor, and then the sphere 2, drag that into the second spawn actor. And then from the top spawn actor, we are going to drag off and then cast to the primary vehicle. In my case, that would be the BP tutorial. And then from the as BP tutorial cost 2, I'm going to drag off and then look for the configuration custom event. And then below the configuration, right click and then get player controller. And then the controller we're going to look for is the controller that's going to be used in the open world. So drag off and then look for PC. Oh, so like they don't have a controller for the open world. Blueprints. Oh, it's PC tutorial. And then drag off and then look for PC tutorial. So now we can find the tutorial. If you can't find it, it's probably because we haven't configured the game mode yet. So in the game mode override, select, and then we're gonna select the GM tutorial, which has the default pawn class as the BP tutorial, and then the player control class is the PC tutorial, which is the one we're gonna use here. So if you can't find it, then just make sure that you have the game mode override as the one that's gonna be used in the open world, and then as well the player controller class needs to be the one that's going to be used in the open world as well. So with that, we're going to connect the cost to the configuration, and then from the cost to PC tutorial, we're going to drag off and then look for possess. So we're going to possess the vehicle, and then the in pawn comes from the spawn actor. So from the return value, drag off and then connect that to the in pawn. And then finally, we are then going to drag off from the cost to BP tutorial, and then drag off from there. And then we're going to look for set target gear to 1, the custom event. And then we're going to connect that. The reason why we have the set target gear to 1 is because if you are going to use the custom transmission that I'm going to make later on in the tutorial, it has a little bit of a weird thing with neutral, where sometimes you can get out of neutral by accelerating, other times it doesn't want to, then you have to reverse first, then you are allowed to get into first gear. So to make it consistent, I rather just set it to, when you spawn in, it's automatically set itself to first gear, but that's only if you're going to use the custom automatic transmission that I'm going to create later on. If you're going to leave the set automatic transmission that comes with chaos as your default, then you're not going to need the custom event. This is only for if you want to also make use of the custom automatic transmission later on. So with that, we are done with that, and then we can just take all of this and then Control D and then connect it to the bottom spawn actor, because we're going to need it for both. And then just remember, from the spawn actor return value, connect that to the possess, and then that is going to be it for this code. So what this does is that when we purchase a vehicle, we are going to use this save slot for the blueprint, and then we are going to call this whenever we open up the open world, and then we're going to look for is it valid, and if it's valid, we proceed further. And then next thing we're going to look for, are we spawning in from the dealership or are we spawning in from the workshop? So if we're spawning in from the workshop, we're going to use the location of the first sphere to spawn in the car, and if we're spawning in from the dealership, we're then going to use the second sphere and then spawn the car in from there, and then we're going to possess it, configure the vehicle with the configuration custom event, which we're going to expand upon later on with things like setting the car's torque and the other parameters such as the color and other things like that. And then we're gonna cast to the player controller, that is the main player controller for the level, possess the spawned in pawn, and then we're gonna set target to 1 for the automatic transmission. And then that is pretty much it for this code. And we're gonna compile, save, and then we can close this, and then And then thing to note is please remember to fill in the BPS vehicle blueprint structure in the game instance, because we are going to be making use of it once we get started with the dealership level, so that we can know which cars are available to the player and then which ones we can purchase as well. And then that will be it for this video. That's all, and until the next one.